In the dark waters of the Red Sea, April 2025, a group of armed drones skims low over the waves. Their controllers, Houthi rebels from Yemen, believe they found an easy target, a lone cargo ship plodding along a major shipping lane. They couldn't be more wrong. Within minutes, the defenseless vessel reveals itself to be a U.S. Navy Arleigh Burke-class destroyer, bristling with weapons and cutting-edge sensors. What started as an attempted ambush quickly turns into a nightmare for the attackers. Welcome to one of the most intense naval engagements of the 21st century. In this gripping story, we'll break down how the Houthis launched a drone and missile assault, thinking they were targeting a defenseless cargo ship, only to discover their big mistake. They had picked a fight with a U.S. warship. We'll witness the blow-by-blow of that April 2025 showdown, the rapid launches of Navy interceptors, the thunderous burst of the CIWS Gatling gun, and the rebels' payloads being blown out of the sky. We'll also see how the U.S. Gatling gun and the rebels' payloads being blown out of the sky struck back afterwards, and why this battle mattered far beyond those waves, from deterring Iran's proxies to safeguarding global shipping. Strap in as we dive into the Red Sea war zone, where one misidentified ship nearly sparked an international crisis. This showdown didn't come out of nowhere. It was the culmination of a campaign that had been escalating for over a year. The trouble began in late 2023, when Yemen's Houthi rebels, an Iran-backed militia, declared they would target ships in the Red Sea to protest U.S. support for Israel during the Gaza war. Beginning in October 2023, the Houthis unleashed a wave of missile and drone strikes on vessels passing Yemen's coast, crippling one of the world's busiest maritime routes. Normally about 12% of global shipping traffic flows through the Red Sea, but companies grew so fearful that many rerouted around Africa, despite the huge extra distance. By April 2025, the UK Defence Secretary would note that shipping traffic through the Red Sea had dropped 55%, costing billions in trade losses, a testament to how effective the Houthi threat had become. The Houthis didn't discriminate much in their targets. They struck oil tankers, container ships, bulk carriers, innocent merchant sailors carrying goods with no connection to any war, as one U.S. destroyer skipper lamented. They also periodically claimed attacks on U.S. or allied naval vessels, trying to score propaganda points. In fact, by mid-March 2025, these rebels had attacked over 190 ships, sinking 2, seizing another, and killing at least 4 civilian mariners. They even fired ballistic missiles at distant cities, reaching as far as Tel Aviv in one case, and launched kamikaze drones at Israel and Saudi Arabia. The situation was unprecedented, the most intense running sea battle the U.S. Navy has faced since World War II, as Navy officials and experts told the AP in mid-2024. That might sound like hyperbole, but consider the experience of the USS Carney in October 2023. On the night of October 19th, Carney, a sister ship of the destroyer in our April 2025 incident, came under a massive Houthi barrage. The crew suddenly heard the 1MC intercom blare, clear the weather decks, followed by the whoosh of missile launches and the thump of the 5-inch deck gun firing. No drills were scheduled. This was the real deal. For the next 10 hours, Carney fought off wave after wave of threats. By the end of that standoff, the destroyer had shot down 15 Houthi drones and 4 cruise missiles, a level of sustained combat marking the most intense combat engagement by a U.S. Navy warship since Dutch UIGE, according to the Navy. Every sailor aboard earned a combat action ribbon for that deployment, and Carney's feat became legendary. Crucially, Carney's stand showed that the U.S. was willing to intervene directly to protect ships. National Security Council spokesperson John Kirby blasted the Houthi attacks as a clear example of terrorism and a violation of international law, vowing that the U.S. and allies would do what we need to do to counter these threats and protect these ships. That wasn't an empty promise. Over the ensuing months, U.S. naval forces in the region steadily increased. By early 2024, the USS Dwight D. Eisenhower Carrier Strike Group, with destroyers like USS Laboon and USS Gravely in escort, was patrolling the Red Sea, shooting down Houthi missiles and drones and escorting convoys. U.S. Central Command set up a special task force to coordinate responses to Houthi launches. Every time rebels fired from Yemen's coast, U.S. radar operators were watching, ready to react in minutes. The Houthis, however, were emboldened by their ability to cause pain. They continued to push the envelope, developing new tactics and weapons with suspected Iranian support. They deployed drone boats, remotely piloted explosive speedboats, reminiscent of the Al-Qaeda attack on USS Cole in 2000. They fielded more advanced anti-ship missiles, including an Iranian-designed cruise missile, unveiled in 2024, and longer-range drones. And they demonstrated a willingness to fire on U.S. warships. In August 2024, Houthi spokesman Yahya Saree bragged that they had launched drones at the USS Cole and ballistic missiles at the USS Laboon, while also targeting a civilian container ship. In reality, the merchant ship Kintai ship Ono was damaged by near misses, and the U.S. Navy said there was no data to corroborate any hits on its destroyers. But the attempt alone was enough to trigger American retaliation. By early 2025, the pattern was clear. The Houthis were not backing down, and in fact were escalating. In mid-March 2025, after a series of Houthi attacks on ships and even U.S. drones, Washington decided to strike hard. President Donald Trump, in the first months of his second term, ordered decisive and powerful military action against the Houthi insurgents, even threatening to completely annihilate them if needed. The result was Operation Rough Rider, a large-scale U.S. campaign of air and naval strikes, launched on March 15, 2025. U.S. Navy carrier Air Wings, Air Force strike aircraft from regional bases, and even B-2 Spirit stealth bombers were thrown into the fight. They targeted Houthi radar systems, drone workshops, missile launchers, ammo depots, anything that fed the rebel war machine. By late April, CENTCOM reported hitting over 1,000 Houthi targets and killing numerous Houthi fighters and top commanders. The Harry S. Truman Carrier Strike Group took station in the northern Red Sea, joined later by the Carl Vinson Carrier Group, effectively putting two flat tops on the scene. The U.S. Navy was now actively hunting Houthi launch units. Whenever the rebels fired off missiles or sent drones aloft, American surveillance assets would pinpoint the source and often swiftly bomb the site. In one instance on June 13, 2024, during an earlier flare-up, after Houthis attacked a merchant ship with a bomb boat and missiles, CENTCOM announced it destroyed 3 anti-ship cruise missile launchers in Houthi territory and shot down a rebel drone, while 2 Houthi ballistic missiles splashed harmlessly into the sea. Similar decisive counterstrikes became routine in 2025. It's against this backdrop, a determined insurgent threat at sea, and a massive U.S. counter-campaign, that our April 2025 incident unfolds. The stage is set for a high-stakes encounter. Early April 2025, Red Sea. The sun has just dipped below the horizon, leaving a sliver of moonlight on gentle waves. A U.S. Navy destroyer, let's call her the USS Gravely for our narrative. Though official reports didn't name the ship, radar contacts have been relatively routine, occasional friendly cargo ships, fishing dhows hugging the Yemeni coast, maybe a curious Iranian dhow shadowing in the distance. The crew is at a relaxed but vigilant posture. That's about to change very quickly. Suddenly, the ship's powerful Aegis combat system alarms ring out in the Combat Information Center. The AN/SAF-Y-1 phased array radar has picked up multiple inbound tracks flying off the Yemeni coastline. In an instant, the computer categorizes them. Likely unmanned drones, skimming low and fast. Then another alert, a high-fast contact, possibly a cruise missile coming in behind the drones. The destroyer goes to general quarters, battle stations, in seconds. Sailors seal hatches and don flak vests. In CIC, radar operators and fire controlmen get to work targeting the threats. This is exactly what the ship was built for. On the scope, the incoming bogies are approaching in a loose swarm. The Houthis have launched a coordinated salvo, several suicide drones, essentially remote-controlled flying bombs, and at least 1 or 2 winged anti-ship cruise missiles. It's a tactic they've used before, overwhelm a target's defenses with a mix of drones from different directions and a missile or 2 coming in fast. They think they're aiming at a helpless cargo ship that will never see it coming. But this time, they've unwittingly challenged a warship that has the most advanced naval air defense system on the planet. The Aegis system, aboard an Arleigh Burke destroyer, is a marvel of automation and raw power. Its Spy-1 radar can track over 100 targets simultaneously, scanning the sky every few seconds and feeding data to the combat computers. The system quickly prioritizes the threats. The suspected missile is flying at sea-skimming altitude, likely a low cruise missile intended to slip under radar. Too bad for the Houthis, Spy-1 can pluck even a golf ball-sized object out of the sky at over 165 kilometers. Drones have slower speed and a distinctive profile, which the system also recognizes. The ship's tactical action officer authorizes weapons free, meaning the ship can engage all identified hostiles. With a whoosh and a roar, the destroyer's forward vertical launch system expels a missile into the night sky. It's a Standard Missile 6, SM-6, one of the U.S. Navy's newest multi-mission interceptors. The SM-6 erupts from its cell, the booster kicking it to supersonic velocity almost instantly. In just moments, it's hurtling at over Mach 3.5 toward the inbound cruise missile. That's more than 1,200 meters per second, so fast that from launch to intercept, perhaps 20 kilometers out, it might take only 15-20 seconds. The SM-6's active radar seeker locks on to the Houthi missile's radar signature. Closing, impact. High above the sea, a flash erupts as the warhead of the SM-6 detonates near the target, shredding the incoming missile's airframe. The hostile missile breaks apart and plummets harmlessly into the water. One threat down. But there's no time for cheers. The drones are still coming, and they're now within a few kilometers, zigzagging toward the ship at low altitude. The destroyer's crew brings additional weapons to bear. 2 smaller Sea Sparrow ESSM missiles leap out from the launcher, each homing in on a different drone. Within seconds, 2 fireballs in the sky mark where those drones used to be. Others remain, however, closing the distance. The decision is made to let the ship's close-in defenses handle the rest. On the bridge wing, lookouts actually visually spot a droning engine and a small light in the distance, a kamikaze UAV heading straight in. CIWS, engage, comes the order. The Phalanx CIWS, close-in weapon system, a white dome-shaped turret nicknamed R2D2, swivels toward the threat automatically, its radar locking on. An instant later, it emits that famous growl. Brr-brrt. The Phalanx's 6-barrel Gatling gun spews a stream of 20mm shells at 75 rounds per second, forming a wall of tungsten in the drone's path. In a matter of 1 or 2 seconds, the Phalanx can unleash a burst of a few hundred rounds. Tracers arc out, and in a heartbeat, the incoming drone is shredded, exploding into fragments under the onslaught. The CIWS's computer confirms the kill and immediately begins searching for the next target. Another drone pops up on its scope at closer range off the port bow. Burt! The stream of bullets shifts and rakes the second UAV, sending it crashing into the sea in pieces. From the perspective of the Houthi operators back in Yemen, it must be a complete shock. One moment their drone cameras may have shown the silhouette of a ship on the horizon. The next static, the feed lost. Likewise, their cruise missile, which they likely boasted as a ship killer, vanished from their radar. What was supposed to be an easy victory has turned into a textbook demonstration of American naval air defense. In the span of a minute or two, all of the Houthis' attacking munitions are defeated. Not a single one even reached effective range to damage the U.S. destroyer. The cargo ship that the Houthis intended to sink sails on unscathed, guarded by a watchful guardian that the rebels never expected to encounter. For the sailors aboard the U.S. warship, the engagement was intense but brief. Adrenaline is coursing through everyone's veins. Some crew on deck barely caught a glimpse of distant explosions. Others heard the rapid thud of the CIWS and knew it meant business. In the CIC, the radar screens now show clear of inbound hostiles. A voice crackles over the radio nets. Vampire threat neutralized. All tracks splash. Vampire is Navy code for an inbound anti-ship missile. Splash indicates a kill. A sense of relief and quiet pride spreads through the crew. They faced live fire and emerged without a scratch. However, the situation is not entirely over. The destroyer's commanding officer knows that those drones and missiles came from somewhere, likely a mobile launch site or a rebel-controlled port in Yemen. And U.S. doctrine in this campaign is clear. Don't just play defense, hit back. Quickly, the ship's combat team shares targeting data up the chain. A MQ-9 Reaper drone that was orbiting high above, part of persistent surveillance, is tasked to sleuth along the Yemeni coast for the launch point. Sure enough, infrared sensors pick up what looks like the heat signature of a rocket launch, and some vehicles in a coastal marshland, about 30 miles north of the city of Al-Hudaydah, a known Houthi stronghold. It's a good bet that's where the attack originated. The destroyer itself has a potent way to respond. Tomahawk cruise missiles. Under normal rules of engagement, a U.S. warship can return fire on launch sites once positively identified. It so happens that this Arleigh Burke is carrying a few Tomahawks specifically for time-sensitive strikes ashore. Within minutes, the order is given. Engage the launch site. On the ship's aft vertical launch cells, a hatch flies open, and a Tomahawk missile erupts in a blaze of fire. It levels out and races toward Yemen, skimming low over the sea just as the enemy's missiles did, but in the opposite direction. Tomahawks aren't supersonic. They cruise subsonically, but they are precise. This one is programmed to hit that marshalling area where the drones and missile likely came from. Minutes later, on the Yemeni coast, Houthi fighters are scrambling to pack up their remaining launcher equipment and relocate. They know a counterstrike is coming. Some attempt to flee when a low roaring sound grows loud. The Tomahawk slams into the site in a massive blast, obliterating vehicles and kick-starting secondary explosions as any remaining munitions cook off. A fireball lights up the night. It's very likely the Houthi team that carried out the attack has just paid the price. Meanwhile, back over the Red Sea, the USS Gravely in our story has called in air support to ensure there isn't a second wave inbound. The Harry S. Truman carrier, stationed not far away, had already launched an airborne SEAP combat air patrol when the alarm was raised. Two F/A-18E Super Hornets screaming low over the destroyer, then arc toward the Yemeni shoreline. They're loaded for bear, each carrying AIM-120 AIMRAAM air-to-air missiles and AGM-88 HARM anti-radar missiles, just in case the Houthis have any air defenses or try to fire another salvo. Tonight, no further threats emerge. The Hornets report negative contacts and circle back to the carrier. In a matter of perhaps 15 minutes, the fight is over. The Houthis attempted a surprise attack. The U.S. Navy not only foiled it but delivered a brutal riposte. It's a textbook example of why you don't bring a knife to a gunfight. Or in this case, why you don't bring off-the-shelf drones to a high-tech naval destroyer battle. The Houthis had attacked the wrong ship, as one headline later put it, and paid dearly. The immediate counterstrike from the destroyer was just the opening act. Washington was not about to let a direct attack on a U.S. Navy ship go unanswered on a broader scale. Within hours of the engagement, additional retaliatory measures were underway. The intelligence gleaned from the engagement, such as the types of drones and missiles used and the location of the launch, was relayed to the Combined Air Operations Center, coordinating Operation Rough Rider. That same night, Pentagon officials publicly condemned the incident, with CENTCOM calling the Houthi actions reckless and dangerous behavior that posed a clear and imminent threat to international shipping and regional stability. Behind closed doors, target lists were updated for the next day's strikes. The following morning, U.S. forces unleashed a series of retaliatory strikes deeper into Yemen. A formation of Navy F-35C Joint Strike Fighters from the carrier Vinson, which had just arrived on station, conducted a dawn raid on a known Houthi drone storage facility tucked in the mountains. Using GPS-guided JDAM bombs and standoff missiles, they leveled the warehouses believed to house dozens of one-way attack drones. Separately, an Air Force B-1B Lancer heavy bomber, which had flown in from Diego Garcia, launched long-range JAS-SM cruise missiles at a Houthi training camp, where Iranian advisors were suspected to be present. The message was unmistakable. Hitting a U.S. Navy ship, even by mistake, would bring overwhelming wrath. One of the most significant responses came about a week and a half later. On April 17, 2025, U.S. warplanes struck the Ras Sa oil terminal on Yemen's west coast, a site the Houthis controlled and used both for revenue and possibly as cover for military assets. The strike was massive and deadly. Houthi-run authorities claimed 80 people were killed and 150 wounded in the Ras Isa attack, including workers and rescuers. It was reportedly the deadliest single attack since the U.S. campaign began, and it appeared to be aimed not just at Houthi capabilities, but at their wallet. Destroying a fuel port sent a painful signal to the rebel leadership and, likely, to their sponsors in Tehran. Some analysts noted that the sheer scale of the Ras Isa strike was meant to send a message to Tehran, showing Iran that its proxy's infrastructure could be destroyed in a heartbeat, at a time when the U.S. was also ramping up pressure on Iran's nuclear program. Indeed, the geopolitics were impossible to ignore. The Houthis were widely seen as an Iranian proxy, part of Tehran's so-called axis of resistance. By hammering the Houthis, the U.S. was indirectly warning Iran. After Ras Isa, President Trump doubled down on his rhetoric, at one point threatening to annihilate the Houthi movement if that's what it took to stop the attacks. The Pentagon, for its part, kept emphasizing that the Red Sea must remain a safe corridor for global commerce. British and French warships joined U.S. naval patrols to bolster security, a true multinational show of force. On April 30, 2025, the UK even carried out its first airstrike in Yemen in this campaign. RAF Typhoon jets, in coordination with the U.S., bombed a Houthi drone production hub about 15 miles south of Sana'a. These were the first British strikes of the conflict, marking how seriously allies took the threat. Britain's Defense Secretary John Healey explicitly cited the need to protect freedom of navigation and noted the steep drop in shipping traffic due to Houthi aggression, vowing the UK will not hesitate to take action to protect innocent lives. Even as U.S. and allied strikes pounded them, the Houthis remained defiant. Shortly after the Ras Isa port bombing, Houthi officials claimed retaliation strikes of their own. In late April, Yahya Saree, the same spokesman, announced they had fired missiles at 2 U.S. aircraft carriers and even at a target near Israel's Ben Gurion airport. This was likely bluster. U.S. officials noted no successful attacks on carriers, and indeed one Houthi missile launched around April 20th malfunctioned and crashed into a Sana'a market, tragically killing a dozen Yemeni civilians. But the Houthis were clearly trying to save face and project strength. Sari warned that the American military buildup and continued aggression will only lead to more counterattacks. For the U.S. Navy, the intensity of operations in the Red Sea was something not seen in decades. Captains had to perform high-speed maneuvers to evade potential threats. At one point in late April, the USS Harry S. Truman made such a sharp turn to avoid a possible incoming missile that a parked $60 million FA-18 Super Hornet slid right off the deck into the sea. That expensive loss made headlines, but it underscored how real the danger was. A carrier literally had to dodge missiles. Sailors on destroyers and cruisers were pulling long hours on watch, maintaining a constant 360-degree guard. F-35C fighters flying off the carriers were busy too. They reportedly shot down numerous Houthi drones mid-air before those could ever reach their targets. It was a full-scale effort to nullify the Houthis' offensive push. By the end of April 2025, the ferocious back-and-forth began to wind down, largely due to diplomatic efforts. Facing relentless U.S. bombardment, the Houthi leadership signaled openness to a pause. Oman quietly brokered talks between the U.S. and the rebels, and on May 6, 2025, a ceasefire was announced. The Houthis agreed to halt attacks on U.S. and coalition ships, while the Americans agreed to suspend their airstrike campaign. Notably, the Houthis pointedly said the truce did not in any way include stopping attacks on Israeli targets. They wanted to keep that card on the table. Still, for the first time in over a year, the Red Sea saw a drop in violence. Shipping companies cautiously began to revert to the Suez route instead of the long detour around Africa. The April 2025 destroyer incident, where Houthi rebels mistakenly tangled with a U.S. Navy ship, proved to be a crucial turning point. In the immediate sense, it showcased the lethality and readiness of U.S. naval forces. A single Arleigh Burke-class destroyer, using its layered defenses, long-range SM-6 missiles, medium-range ESSMs, and the close-in phalanx gun, had defeated an entire swarm of attack drones and missiles without suffering a hit. This undoubtedly gave any hostile actors, including Iran, pause. In military circles, the engagement has already become a case study in modern distributed maritime operations. Essentially, how a lone ship can hold the line against advanced asymmetric threats when networked with good intel and supported by air cover. It validated the Navy's investment in systems like Aegis and the SM-6, which can strike both air-breathing targets and even ballistic missiles in their final phase. From a strategic perspective, the incident and its aftermath bolstered U.S. deterrence in the region, at least toward direct attacks on American assets. The Houthis, by misidentifying or underestimating a target, provoked a response that severely degraded their capabilities. By late April, CENTCOM noted a significant decrease in Houthi missile and drone launches compared to the initial onslaught, indicating that U.S. strikes had taken a toll on their arsenal. American officials touted that the campaign had dealt a serious blow to the militants' ability to threaten ships. In other words, the Houthis were finally deterred, not by diplomacy or sanctions, but by the very real prospect of being blown to bits whenever they poked their heads out to shoot at a vessel. There were broader geopolitical implications as well. For Iran, the episode was a double-edged sword. On one hand, Iran saw how its provision of advanced drones and missiles to the Houthis had caused headaches for a superpower, a proof of concept for the effectiveness of asymmetric warfare. On the other hand, Iran also witnessed the U.S. and its allies close ranks and respond forcefully, even risking wider war to keep a vital waterway open. The U.S. strikes on Houthi infrastructure were a not-so-veiled warning. Iran's own assets could be next if Tehran kept fueling proxy fires. In fact, by summer 2025, tensions with Iran would spike even more, with the U.S. striking Iranian nuclear facilities and Iran threatening naval mines, but that's another story. For regional players like Saudi Arabia and the UAE, the April 2025 clash was vindication of their warnings about Houthi aggression. These Gulf states had fought the Houthis for years in Yemen, but by 2023 to 2025, they had drawn down direct involvement, leaving a fragile truce in Yemen's civil war. Yet the Red Sea attacks forced them back into concern. They quietly supported the U.S.-led Operation Prosperity Guardian, the coalition maritime security mission, and likely shared intelligence on Houthi launch sites. Israel, too, had a stake. The Houthis explicitly launched missiles at Israel to support Gaza, even killing one Israeli civilian in a drone strike. Israel began deploying naval assets like the INS Hanat corvette to the Red Sea in late 2023. After the April 2025 U.S., like the INS Hanat corvette to the Red Sea in late 2023, retaliation, Israeli officials probably sighed in relief as the American show of force took some heat off Israel's Red Sea flank. Of course, the incident also had humanitarian and legal dimensions. The high civilian toll of strikes like the Ras Isa bombing drew criticism from international observers. Killing scores of people at a fuel port, even if it hampered the Houthis, raised questions about proportionality and war crimes. The U.S. insisted it was targeting military infrastructure and that the Houthis were using civilian sites as shields. The truth likely lay in a gray area, as it often does in such conflicts. But scenes of burning port facilities and reports of dead workers put pressure on the U.S. to find a non-military solution sooner than later. That pressure, combined with back-channel negotiations, helped drive the ceasefire. Another takeaway was the impact on the global economy. The Red Sea is the gateway to the Suez Canal, and sustained conflict there can wreak havoc on trade. We already noted the detours ships took. One wild statistic: by spring 2025, insurance premiums for vessels entering the Red Sea had skyrocketed, and some 55% of shipping traffic had evaporated from the route. The cost of shipping oil and goods went up worldwide. When the ceasefire was announced, oil prices, which had spiked on news of attacks, eased slightly. In short, ensuring safe passage in those waters isn't just a military concern, it's a global economic priority. The April 2025 incident underscored that if the U.S. Navy hadn't been there to intervene, we might have seen a major cargo ship sunk, which could have closed the Red Sea to commerce entirely for weeks, with ripple effects on supply chains. It's a reminder of the Navy's often unseen role as guardian of the global economy. Finally, this episode left us with some vivid individual stories and lessons. The crew of that Arleigh Burke destroyer earned a place in Navy lore alongside USS Carney's heroes. You can bet they painted a new missile silhouette or drone kill markings on the bridge wing, as Navy pilots do on their jets. The commanding officer of the ship likely had his finest hour, seamlessly orchestrating defense and counterstrike. One can imagine the Task and Purpose YouTube host quipping that the skipper went all Captain America on those incoming missiles, shield up and everything. For the sailors, especially the younger ones on their first deployment, it was baptism by fire. They trained for years for a moment like this, and when it came, they performed. As one fire controlman on Carney said after his 2023 battle, "We had never done anything like this before, we had only trained for it." Training paid off. On the Houthi side, some fighters surely learned the hard way that not every ship in the sea is an easy victim. What they thought was a fat, defenseless tanker was actually a wolf in sheep's clothing, or rather, a warship in merchant's clothing. It calls to mind the old Wetu Q ships, heavily armed merchant decoys. While the destroyer wasn't literally disguised, in the dark the rebels clearly didn't realize what they were shooting at. Perhaps next time they will think twice before assuming any blip on their screen is fair game. The April 2025 Red Sea incident will be remembered as the day a band of insurgents dared to challenge a U.S. Navy destroyer head-on and got humbling results. It's a story of high-tech defense meeting low-tech offense, of a mistake that nearly exploded into a larger war, and of the razor-thin line between commerce and conflict on the world's waterways. The U.S. Navy emerged from this trial bloodied but unbowed, having proven that even in this age of drones and asymmetric threats, a well-drilled crew on a superbly equipped ship can fend off swarms of attackers and keep the sea lanes open. The Houthis, for their part, won a painful respect for American capabilities, if not for American restraint, and the world was starkly reminded that the Red Sea, a lifeline of globalization, can become a war zone at any moment if powers large or small choose to make it so. As U.S. officials succinctly put it, freedom of navigation is non-negotiable. Merchant ships must be able to transit without coming under fire. By decisively reacting to the Houthi attack, the U.S. signaled to all would-be disruptors that it will not tolerate such aggression. At least for now, a tense calm prevails in those waters. How long will it last? That depends on whether the underlying political conflicts in Yemen, in Gaza, between Iran and the West, can be resolved or at least managed. If not, the Red Sea could flare up again, and U.S. warships might be called on once more to play guardian. Next time, the stakes could be even higher. Imagine if a Houthi missile hit an LNG tanker, or if a U.S. ship suffered casualties. It's a sobering prospect and a reminder of the volatility of the region. For now, though, let's appreciate the dramatic tale we've just unraveled. One April night, the Iran-backed Houthis picked a fight with what they thought was a lumbering freighter. Instead, they found themselves in the crosshairs of an Arleigh Burke destroyer, one of the most sophisticated fighting ships afloat, and that encounter ended very poorly for them. It's the kind of real-world naval drama that reads like an action thriller, yet it happened in real time with real lives on the line. The lesson? Know your enemy, and maybe invest in a better radar before you go hunting in the dark. What do you think about this showdown in the Red Sea? Was the U.S. response justified and effective in deterring further attacks, or did it risk escalating the conflict too far? And what about the broader strategy? Can military force really secure peace on vital waterways, or is a diplomatic solution the only lasting answer? Share your take in the comments below. We're eager to hear your thoughts on this modern naval battle and its implications. As always, stay sharp, stay informed, and until next time, fair winds and following seas.